But I have a lot of experiences in general in supply chain management, real-world supply chain management, and also with energy. So actually, if I'm, just a little bit about my person, because currently I'm the chief scientific advisor to the Dutch flower auction. So with actually with Ising Lu, his wife, she was a PhD student of mine. We actually revolutionized the Dutch flower auction mechanism, and we're able to actually get about an additional 250,000 profits more per day just through analytics. So we observe the auctioning patterns, what is going on in the auction, what is the speed of the auction, who is present in the auction. We observed offline versus online behavior, and throughout that analytics behavior, we are able to give real-time advice to the auctioneer how to set auction parameters. And that is quite, it's the first time in 150 plus years actually that Dutch flower auctions, Floor Holland actually changed the mechanism because of our research. And they're sponsoring now new PhD students. In about 2008, the German Chancellor Merkel has asked me to join an energy advisory policy panel for Germany, but also on the European Parliament. So my research group is looking into how to design new energy markets. And we are working on setting up new markets, a lot also with real-time data and collaborating with many companies around the world. For example, with electric vehicle providers like who are coming strong now, BMW, Daimler, for example. We're working with Cisco, Siemens in that space of new grid, new energy markets, electric vehicles and the like. So that's a little bit my background. But we also have a new big project with the Port of Rotterdam going on. So as a professor, sometimes you have the liberty to actually tell some stories, and I want to use that opportunity more like in a storytelling manner here in this audience. And it's kind of a high-level thing, but I think you get the stories behind that storytelling, so to speak. And in the second part of the talk, I will go into more particular projects, and we can open it up to discussions and also analogies to other areas. So if you pretty much... Nowadays, we have heard already so many advancing about the Internet of Things and so on. But if we zoom ourselves, for a couple minutes back to literally, like Stone Age time, what have people done? They were pretty much very simplified markets, right? I mean, almost like information, informal local markets. And what happens there, if you want to do some trading, then actually you are looking for people. And that was relatively easy usually. When you're living in a village or so on, I like to stay here because the light is not so hard. If you are living in a village and you wanted to get something done, maybe you had X to offer, but you needed a ride, literally with a horse or something, or somebody had a horse, but you didn't, or you want to have some meat, but you were thinking about trading. And then what did you do? You were looking for trading partners, literally, right? Then you were thinking, okay, you're trying to exchange information. You see there are some flashes, some bowls flying around this area. And when you see the gray bowls, this is really referring to data. That is kind of like data exchange in, very simple times, right? And once in a while you see a yellow bowl flying around. That is actually real useful information for you. That means, okay, this is actually something good that I can use, right? So actually, okay, let's look at an example. Okay, let's say I have some eggs and I want to have some, meat. And I say, that's not a good match for me, right? So I go look further, right? So maybe I have now a horse and I have a chicken. I said, oh, one guy is very happy, but the otherwise, said, that's not a good match, right? If you just think about currency and exchange. Then going forward, I said, hey, maybe, okay, you can borrow my horse if I get some bread from you. So everybody's happy and their hearts are glowing. Very simple at that time. It's actually a matter of preference matching, right? Everybody has preferences. And nowadays also in marketing, what Nindo presented or whatever, preferences are the holy grail of marketing, or also in your healthcare, right? If you know what the preferences of your customers are, it's much easier to match and also to utilize the available data. Okay, so then we have learned something. Now we fast forward maybe to around, just 20, 30 years ago, already in the Middle Ages or whatever, formal global markets emerged. And what is the big difference there? It's actually essentially not that different than in a small village. But the only difference is, or the major difference is, that just many more people are available, right? I mean, it's a lot more people. So that's really the difference at scale. And now we have all kinds of stuff you have to all offer for trading purposes, right? It's not just more simple eggs or meat or horse rice. It's all kinds of stuff you have available. Even like you have now companies are players, and institutions can be part of that trading. And then, of course, now the match, to find a match becomes much, much harder, right? How to exchange information, because now you have zillions of players around, right? How do you learn actually to make the matching? That's a hard task. Now you move fast forward to our times, and then this morning it was already, I think in York's slides and other slides, the Internet of Things, right? A big deal. Around 2020, we're expecting about 50 billion connected devices. That's a lot of data, right? And if you think that each of these 50 billion devices can maybe do, like I'm working in the energy space, they can have minute by minute metering data, or even sub-minute. I mean, you go crazy, right? I mean, you have, this is an exponential growth which you can't handle almost anymore. So we need to think how to handle that, right? So what's the difference here? Again, the scale is different, right? Literally, everybody's talking about cloud, but here's actually a cloud of information hanging above our heads, right? It's full of this data. We literally get showered with data, with tons of data. And that's a really difficult problem, right? I mean, like at some point, say, okay, give me more data, and I'm saying, oh my God, right? So much data, what to do? Right? And that is actually a problem we are referring to cognitive overload. Right? People having cognitive overload. I mean, at some point, if I offer you want a tea or coffee, so okay, that's good. Already if I say, do you want a tea, coffee, espresso, macchiato, double, with skim milk, without it, at some point you say, just give me water, right? I mean, it's just too much, right? So here's the same. Like you get a plethora of information. Really, you get showered with information. At some point, you said, okay, how do I pick the right information? And when you look closely at the picture, you see most of it is actually gray balls. Once in a while, there's some yellow balls, and once in a while, there's some green balls. And actually, the green ball, that's actually what we are after here. Because the green ball is, if the gray balls are pretty much like kind of noise. Right? I mean, like 98, 99% of the information we are getting over the day is pretty much noise. But you have to try to figure out what is good information. These are the yellow balls. And the yellow balls can be good information for you at any moment in time, but actually the green information are really, somebody was mentioning this morning, maybe it was York or somebody else, or was an Indo, maybe get the right information to you at the right moment in the time, right? So when you're ready, that piece of information should be supplied to you. And that's actually the green bolt here. So we're trying to figure out, okay, what are the preferences of the people? What do they like? Or, these are not just for business purposes or for private purposes. And then dependent on which kind of role we are playing at that moment in time. Are we a family person, mother, father? Are we a business person? Are we, private person? Whatever kind of person we have. Some of these yellow balls might be applicable to us. So actually, about 20, 25 years ago, we from the information systems community coined a term which is called smart markets. So what are smart markets? Smart markets are markets that really trying to increase what we call, from an economics perspective, trying to increase the allocative efficiency. Trying to really match a product with a certain person or a company who values that product the most. And so trying to really figure out who is getting what in matching it in a useful manner. That's a smart allocation. And that's going to be very hard. And I just showed before this information overload, this cognitive overload. And actually my research group, when Ray was introducing me, he was mentioning a couple of research groups. One of these research groups is called LARGE, stands for Learning Agent Research Group at Erasmus. And these are these agents, right? They're a little bit bigger with us, and they especially have bigger heads, right? Lots of information getting in the head. And what are these agents? These agents are intelligent pieces of software that learn our preferences, goals, and desire, and they can act on our behalf in real time. So over time, they learn patterns from us, temporal, spatial patterns. We have all kinds of machine learning coming into place here. And then you see these hearts. And that just means they are working in concert, right, with each other over time. And that is a very important thing here. And this is the preference matching. So when that's why I asked this morning, like the colleague who presented this UCross project, I say, hey, it would just make a logical sense to continue until old age, right? Because these agents, they literally, they get born. I mean, nowadays they can get born at any moment in time, but then they should stick with you, right? They should learn with you, and you should learn with the agents, and that software should learn and help with each other in the same, I imagine, I'm not into this UCross project, but I can imagine in a very similar vein. Right? So over time. And what are these agents then do? Because I sometimes once in a while need to sleep, right? These agents don't have to sleep, right? These agents, they know our preferences, they can attract all the information what we need, right? And in that moment, they pass on what they think is the right information for us in that very moment. Because sometimes I get a cognitive overload, right? So that is like, when do I decide what is the right information and can I accept that information? And so when we are in that moment in time, for example, one of the examples I go and tell you in a second about is electric vehicle charging. This new energy landscape is changing dramatically. We will see not just flat prices, we see variable prices. And once in a while, prices can be lost during the night. And I sleep relatively little, but once in a while if I sleep, then I really need to sleep well. So these agents can then act on my behalf and charge my electric vehicle during the night, for example. They can start charging when the prices are the lowest, for example. So I don't have to do, and then everybody's happy. I'm happy, the agent gets positive feedback. Okay, he's happy about what I did. So it's a positive reinforcement. I'm going to go down the road and do more of this. But there's, of course, a catch-22. We call that, as an AI or machine learning researcher, we call this the exploitation problem of artificial intelligence and machine learning. You have to learn, what is the good way to explore and what is the good way, the learning rate to exploit the space, right? And that's what we call learning rate. But the problem is like the future, if we go potentially, right? And I see that every day when I talk to research scientists around the world, and I'm just observing with my open eyes, the future is being compromised. Why is this future being compromised? It's like, okay, let's say we are living in this world, right? But there are clear trends in this world, which is like, in the beginning it was all hunky-dory, right? We lived, the fish are jumping, we're living here and having a good life. But over time, what is happening, right? We have two major trends, what we call global disruptive forces, which is going on. This is population growth and economic development. And if you're going on like this, then we are squeezing our resources very much. There's actually a point, people arguing when this is about, in about August, end of July, beginning of August, we call World Overshoot Day. That is the day actually when we as a world population consume more resources than the Earth can sustainably produce and also absorb our waste. So that would mean actually essentially that we should stop breathing and doing anything until New Year's again of the next year, right? That's not really possible, right? So but what is currently happening is that actually the developed world has many more of these technologies already in place, right? So intelligent decision making. And so what is happening, we from the developed parts of the world using these technologies more and more, and what is going to happen, we get much more efficient in doing this, right? So our things getting more and more and more efficient doing that, but in that point, okay, what are the consequences of doing that? Well, we're exploiting the resources even more, right? So it comes to a point where I say, okay, that's not a good thing, right? We really have to stop that. Otherwise, I say, no, that's not a good way. Right? So this is also in terms of, has very strong implications on health, right? So let's say, every day or so, taking an airplane flight, US back and forth, at some point we ruin our CO2 emissions. Or, deforestations and things like that. It's not very good on health, right? So these are of the category what we call wicked problems. So my research group is really looking into tackling wicked problems. So what are really wicked problems? Wicked problems can be characterized by many different things. Examples are, for example, access to clear water. A lot of people say the next wars might not be about basic resources, but about access to clean water, for example. Or deforestation, like in Brazil, there is a locking down of the rainforest in the size of several football fields a day. Then I said, well, you lock down your forest, why can't we lock down our forest? Well, that's true, but at some point, that forest acts as a lung of our earth, right? We have a serious problem, right, also in health. Pollution, well, that speaks for itself. Healthcare, right? I mean, that's pretty much what's the day about. It's about healthcare. It's a wicked problem. A lot of talks today already, more talks to come. And energy. Energy is pretty much, without energy, you have problems driving or resolving all the others, right? And in my rest of the talk, I focus on energy, but it has, of course, very much implication in healthcare and all the other things. You can actually transform and transfer a lot of these models. So let's look closer at energy. But before, let's look at the different characteristics of wicked problems. First of all, they are very different in scale and scope. What I showed you in the beginning, right? In the beginning, we were looking into like trading in villages and all that stuff. It was very simple. It was very, complexity you could very easily harness. Super easy. But, after the population grows, right, like by 2050 we have 9 or maybe 9.5 billion people on this planet, it's going to be a real tricky problem. Unrealized challenges. So far, people have been looking in, looking into social simulations or whatever. Okay, this has happened. Why did it happen? But a lot of people, they don't look, okay, how can we present things in the future? That is like the quote that Anindo showed with Wayne Gretzky, this Canadian ice hockey player, saying, I'm looking where the puck is going to be, right? So you have to actually look, like, for example, what I'm going to talk next about is this sustainable energy management. We have not a completely 100% renewable energy landscape. So we actually have to find ways on how to simulate that, how to emulate as we would have already, and which kind of implication does it have in policy. The same you can do for healthcare, right? If we would have these measures into place, which kind of policy would we need and which kind of impact it has? Rapid pace. There's this guy, Ray Kurzweil in the US, kind of this technology visionary. And he said if you look at the technology of the development of the last decades, it is more like an exponential curve, right? In the beginning, it kind of looks linear, like this. But we are now looking actually at the knee of that exponential curve. And once we are getting out of this curve, actually, it is really wrapping up. Even the first part was already exponential, but you don't see it, right? Because it just doesn't feel like once you get to that knee of that exponential function, it's really growing rapidly up. And that's where we actually see currently, right? Really going up. Cost of social negatives are very high. So, for example, in Germany, where I advise the government and many companies, or in the European level, is that if we now do this energy turnaround policy in the wrong way, we're implementing the policies wrong, it can have very negative effects on our future generations. Right? Very, very bad effects. And also climate change. We just had the Paris summit. Like if you do now a wrong step, you can only see it 20 plus years later. What's going to happen? So we have to act now and do the right things. Have to make sure these are the right steps down the road. It's sometimes hard to say what the right steps, but we at least have to try. And the complexity is just growing, So now let's look in the next step just for energy, or in particularly actually about electricity. Why we're focusing on electricity is that we believe in terms of energy. A lot of energy is being used, for example, for transportation and also heating and managing buildings. Transportation is about 1/3 of the world, and another 1/3 is used for buildings. These 2/3 together can easily be electrified. As we see, like a week or when was it, 2 weeks ago or 3 by now, when Tesla announced its new model, right? Within 24 hours, the pre-ordering of 200,000 electric vehicles were done, right? Can you imagine a few years ago, if you say somebody, 24 hours, 200,000 electric vehicles are gone? It's just complete change, right? Because we can believe we can electrify transport. And actually the oils, being burned for, combustion engine, we can rather use for medical devices, for medicine, for pharmacy, for other things. Because once these are gone, right, they are not sustainable. Somebody told me the professor, yeah, they are sustainable, it just takes a few million years. I said, okay, that's an argument. But the problem is we won't have the time to absorb that. And at some point, when you come to a point of no return. So actually you want to use all kinds of the energy which are be able to electrify it, because then we have the chance to go renewable. And so what we're doing here, we're looking at electricity, we're looking for wind turbines, we're looking how can we use it in smart homes or in industrial smart cooperatives, electric vehicles, hydro plants, and solar. And what has the smart grid to do with all this data analytics? Like my parents, for example, they still have an energy tariff, a traditional one, like most people do. And they probably much have in 50 years never changed their provider, right? And they usually have one data point a year, that is when their flat or time of use price tariff has been increased in price, right? That's usually the data. But the future energy landscape will have dynamic pricing to incentivize the people to make a change in behavior. And they have minute by minute data. So there will be a plethora of data coming in that needs to be analyzed, analytics and behavior of people in the smart homes, behavioral movement patterns of electric vehicles, gigantic amount of data coming into this scape which was never there before. And that is actually why a lot of, not just because that major reason is because that many incumbents in Germany are suffering because of this energy policy by the government change. But also they have never looked in innovation that way. And now, a few years ago, we had just 4 energy companies in Germany. Now we have close to 1,000 energy companies. A lot of startups moving into the space specifically with the analytics. So if we're combining that all, then we can look in the way of the smart city, right? If we look in the smart city context, we look at electricity, obviously, we look in gas, we look in oil, we look in transportation, and then we think, how can we solve that? So the smart market then actually has to become the sustainable smart market. And what is the big difference here? The big difference is actually that we have to now share information. Let's have a look at it. So currently, now we have our avatars, and it's pretty much like before. The avatars help us to attract the right information and pass on that information, right? And now we're able to really share that information with each other and do better trading. But also, you see, there's a big difference. We're actually shooting up information to the cloud. That is actually, somebody hinted at that, I think, maybe it was in Indo, who had that scale, with privacy and value, right? So the more data you are willing to share with your community, the more benefit are you also able to get out. Because, for example, this new energy landscape is weather dependent, a lot of renewables. So actually, if you're open to sharing data, you can also get better prices for electricity. Because we can actually supply you with electricity when electricity is available. So actually, the change is going to change from a demand-driven to supply-driven network. And the other thing in this new energy landscape is that we are actually looking, or in sustainable smart market in general, that calls for health as well, is that so far, when people were at the marketplace, they usually were these market participants at the table. But we have to include all the stakeholder groups on that table. And they have to give them, some kind of via taxation or whatever. Who are these other stakeholder groups? Often, certain, undeveloped nations who are really are in need for that one to come up. Or our children and their children. They cannot be presented at these marketplaces, right? They need a deputy to be at these marketplaces. How can they get the deputy at these marketplaces, for example, versus particular policies, right? That funds are set aside for them and things like this, so that we can ensure the sustainability of future generations. I give you a couple examples here on hand, electric mobility in the smart city. And we have done a lot of work in this space. So we are collaborating, for example, with Daimler and Smart in 10 cities around the world, where we get real-time metering data, and the company supplies us with the data, and we make suggestions for people to use electric vehicles in this sport, to move electric vehicles, and we come up with new business models that actually use the energy when it's available and make additional profit. So, for example, we have here, let's say, this is kind of maybe an office building. Here's my home, my humble, small, smart home. And here's my agent. And in the future, I'm thinking about autonomous driving, electric vehicle driving, and parking spaces are scarce. So I can actually call. I have my app, and it's almost like in the Western time, the horse, right? I can call my car, to pick me up, right? So there's this thing of autonomy. I can get into the car, and actually the agent knows my patterns and move around. And what is then the agent doing, right? We actually can use these electric vehicles and also autonomous electric vehicles to actually balance the smart grid. And that has to do because once you have a lot of electricity, which is generated by renewable energy resources like wind or solar, they're highly weather dependent. There's a high volatility. So in the past energy landscape, you had like coal or gas generation, which like kind of gives you constant output. But if you want to be renewable, you need to involve renewable energy sources. And once you do that, you have highly fluctuating outcome. So then you actually have to think about, okay, one crucial element which is still missing at a large scale in this new energy landscape is storage, right? When you have storage, one of the hopes in this kind of scenario is that we have electric vehicle batteries which can supply that kind of storage and help. There's a new concept, actually, we're working with many companies like BMW and Daimler, but also now starting a gigantic project with the Port of Rotterdam, using industrial storage, actually doing what we call virtual power plants. So what are virtual power plants? That is actually, imagine like we have a building which is pretty much fully loaded, and I have my smart home here, which has not much energy, right? I mean, this is just a figurative thing here, just illustration purposes, more or less, right? So I can actually use my electric vehicle, I can charge the battery from this one building and actually bring it. I mean, literally it's done slightly different, but I mean, just for representation purposes. And then I can charge the vehicle again, or I have a fleet of electric vehicles, and I can then charge my other building. And that actually helps me to keep my grid balanced. Now think about it. You have millions of electric vehicles in the future to keep the grid balanced. It's a very complex system. But actually what we are doing with Daimler, there is this initiative Car2Go, and we are experimenting with them specifically in Stuttgart, San Diego, and Amsterdam. And actually not only can they charge pretty much their cars for free, but actually we have calculated so that model, they're doing good for themselves in a way, because they charge their cars for free, but also they're doing good for the environment because they can actually trade back that energy stored in the electric vehicle, car batteries, back to the grid, and therefore balancing the grid without that the distribution utility, the local city authorities, have to kick in extra power plants, because these extra power plants are usually very expensive. They are usually unsustainable. They're usually with gas and things like this, right? So actually they're doing good. They're doing an additional 6 to 10% or 12% profit, depending on the state of the battery technology. At the same time, they're doing good for the environment because they actually, when you use these electric vehicles, you don't have to use conventional power plants. And that is really a cool thing. And actually, therefore, the air quality also improves, and the CO2 emissions are less. I think that's a big deal. And that has direct impact of the health. We have also developed mobile apps. We have tested that with almost 1,000 participants around the world, in Europe, in the US, and Asia, where people tested, do I want to buy an electric vehicle? Which type of person I am? So we developed an app where we tracked all their movements, and then they were driving their usual car or the bus or even the bicycle, and then we calculating, dependent on your spatial and temporal movements, this is kind of the car or whatever we would suggest you, or this, electric vehicles. These are patterns. And actually now for the first time, we were able actually to involve real usage patterns. We emulated in a way if you were driving an electric vehicle. And that we did that over behavioral analytics from all these people. And that really had a big effect. And actually BMW is using now these things. And actually we are able now to also do a large-scale field test with them. And then in this scenario, of course, what we are then hoping is, of course, if you're going down this road in renewables, and actually we are able to recover, right? Because otherwise, it's a problem for our society. We cannot just keep on doing that. And then we are replacing some of these other sources with the renewable sources. And in that case, if we do that, then the market is now sustainable, because we cannot just keep abusing the things. You know, what is that? In terms of sustainability, yeah, it's pretty much the same. We have now this share of information. We are tracking the information as before. We're passing the information on. But now it's a big step here, because here we're taking in our new marketplaces, we're taking the needs of the future generations into account. We're setting funds aside or through taxes or whatever to actually keep the environment in a better state. And then we're shooting that information back. And then, of course, we're sharing that data with that information so that they have a good environment. And actually, I would say that is actually what we found with a lot of this analytics work we're doing, is really doing good by doing well. I was saying that the other day as kind of a funny thing, but it's actually the reality. You can come up with a lot of new business models where you as a company profit, do good profits, at the same time do well for the environment and for the people. I think that is something worthy of pursuing, that we should go down further. And I think, you know, like with the health analytics apps or whatever, you're monitoring thing, you're putting the right incentives. It's like with the energy landscape. You need to put the right incentives for the people to use the energy when it's available. And the same is also with the health. So I see there are a lot of analogies. So therefore, I think that's maybe a good point for discussion here. Thank you.